When Clint Eastwood chose to speak publicly about Gene Hackman in the days following Hackman's death in February 2025, he did not give a lengthy interview. He did not sit down with a journalist and walk through decades of shared history. He issued a statement, brief and direct, to Variety, Deadline, People, and Entertainment Weekly, and what he said in that statement was so precisely chosen and so unambiguous in its feeling that it landed across the entertainment world with considerably more weight than any extended tribute could have produced. He said there was no finer actor than Gene. He called him intense and instinctive. He said there was never a false note in anything he did. And then he said that Gene was also a dear friend whom he would miss very much. 4 sentences from a man who has spent his entire professional life demonstrating that economy of expression is not a limitation but a form of power. At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood broke his silence about Gene Hackman and said exactly what needed to be said, without a word more or less than the moment required. For anyone who understood the full history between these two men, those 4 sentences carried the weight of more than 50 years. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31, 1930, in San Francisco, California, according to his documented biography, and grew up moving between various California cities as his father's work required the family to relocate regularly. He was a tall, lean young man with no particular conventional path toward the entertainment industry, working as a lumberjack, steel furnace stoker, and gas station attendant at various points before his military service and before the accident of circumstance that placed him in front of a camera at Universal Pictures in the mid-1950s. The early years of his career produced almost nothing memorable, a series of small television and film appearances that gave no indication of what was coming. The role that changed his trajectory was Rowdy Yates on Rawhide, the CBS Western series that ran from 1959 to 1965, according to documented television history, which gave him the sustained screen presence and the audience familiarity that eventually attracted the attention of Italian director Sergio Leone. Leone cast Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars in 1964, the film that launched the Dollars trilogy and introduced to global audiences the character of the man with no name, a creation that redefined what a Western antihero could be. The stoic physical presence, the minimal dialogue, the moral ambiguity presented without apology, these were qualities that Eastwood brought to the screen in those films and that distinguished him from every Western performer who had preceded him. By the time he returned to Hollywood and made Dirty Harry in 1971, he had become one of the most commercially significant actors in the world and had already begun the transition into directing that would eventually make him one of the most respected filmmakers American cinema has produced. Gene Hackman was born on January 30, 1930, in San Bernardino, California, according to his documented biography, just 4 months before Eastwood and in the same state, though their early lives proceeded in entirely different directions. His father left the family when Gene was a child, and his mother was unable to provide consistent care, leaving him with a childhood defined by instability and institutional displacement. He served in the United States Marine Corps and then spent years in New York studying acting, first at the School of Radio Technique and later at the Pasadena Playhouse, according to his documented educational history, where he and Dustin Hoffman were famously voted by their classmates as least likely to succeed in the entertainment industry. A piece of Hollywood trivia that has circulated widely across the decades and that Hackman himself acknowledged with characteristically dry humor in various interviews. The mainstream acting career that followed that unpromising beginning eventually produced 2 Academy Awards, 5 nominations in total according to documented Academy records, and a body of work across more than 4 decades that placed him in the conversation about the greatest screen actors of the 20th century. The professional relationship between Eastwood and Hackman that produced their most significant shared achievement began in earnest with Unforgiven in 1992. Eastwood had been developing the film, written by David Webb Peoples, 4 years, waiting until he felt old enough to play William Money convincingly, according to multiple documented accounts of the film's production history. The script had been circulating in Hollywood since the early 1980s. When Eastwood finally decided to make it, he cast Hackman in the role of Little Bill Daggett, the sheriff of Big Whiskey who maintains order through systematic cruelty and who functions as the film's primary antagonist, a man who believes sincerely in what he is doing and whose capacity for violence is framed by a genuine conviction that it serves a legitimate social purpose. According to documented accounts of the casting process, including information reported by various entertainment publications covering the film's production, Hackman had initial reservations about accepting the role. He had been a vocal advocate against gun violence, and the material was relentlessly dark in its depiction of what frontier violence actually looks like when stripped of the romanticism that the Western genre had spent decades constructing. Eastwood persisted. Hackman agreed. What he delivered on screen became one of the defining performances in the history of the genre. Little Bill Daggett is not a simple villain. He is a man who builds his own house with his own hands, who has a vision for his community, who exercises authority with the absolute conviction of someone who has never seriously considered that he might be wrong. The moral complexity of the character required Hackman to make audiences understand someone whose worldview and whose methods they would find repugnant, without reducing him to a cartoon of malice. He accomplished this with a precision and an internal consistency that made every scene he appeared in crackle with a specific kind of dangerous energy, the energy of a man who is genuinely comfortable with what he is doing. At the 65th Academy Awards in 1993, according to documented Academy Award records, Hackman won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for that performance. Eastwood won Best Director and Best Picture. The film itself won 4 Academy Awards in total. It is regularly cited in critical assessments of the Western genre as one of the finest examples the form has produced, a film that used the conventions and the visual language of the genre in order to examine what those conventions had been concealing about violence and its costs. Their second significant collaboration came in 1997 with Absolute Power, directed by Eastwood, in which Hackman played a corrupt sitting president of the United States and Eastwood played Luther Whitney, a career thief who witnesses a violent encounter in the president's private residence while in the middle of a burglary and spends the rest of the film attempting to survive the consequences of having seen something the president cannot afford to have witnessed. The film was based on a David Baldacci novel and received mixed critical reception, but it demonstrated that the creative connection between the two men extended beyond the specific circumstances of Unforgiven. They understood each other as performers in a way that made their scenes together function with an efficiency that other pairings of that caliber do not always achieve. Hackman made his final film appearance in 2004, according to documented records of his career, completing his work on Welcome to Mooseport and then withdrawing entirely from the professional world of acting without formal announcement or public statement. He moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his wife Betsy Arakawa, whom he had married in 1991 according to documented records, and spent the 2 decades that followed in almost complete public silence. He painted. He wrote novels. He appeared at virtually no industry events. He gave virtually no interviews. The retirement was total in a way that is genuinely rare for someone of his professional standing, and it reflected what numerous people who knew him have described as a genuine contentment with private life that the years of public recognition had never quite provided. The discovery of Hackman's body, along with that of his wife Betsy Arakawa and one of their dogs, at their Santa Fe home on February 26, 2025, was reported by ABC News and NBC News as a deeply troubling situation whose circumstances were initially unclear. Authorities from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office described the deaths as suspicious in the preliminary stages of the investigation, not because there were signs of criminal activity but because the exact circumstances were unknown and the couple appeared to have been dead for some time before they were found. A maintenance worker had discovered the bodies after arriving at the property and finding the front door open. Sheriff Adon Mendoza told reporters, as reported by ABC News, that Hackman's pacemaker had recorded its last event on February 17, 2025, suggesting that date as a reasonable estimate of when he had died, meaning approximately 9 days had passed between his death and the discovery of the bodies. Both Hackman and Arakawa tested negative for carbon monoxide poisoning, according to Santa Fe County pathologist Dr. Heather Jarrell, as reported by multiple news organizations. The New Mexico Gas Company inspected the property and found no significant gas leaks, according to a press release cited across news coverage of the investigation. Cause of death remained under investigation pending full autopsy and toxicology results, with no signs of foul play evident. It was against this backdrop that Eastwood issued his statement. In the days immediately following the news of Hackman's death, as verified reports were confirmed by Variety, Deadline, People, and Entertainment Weekly, Eastwood chose to speak. The statement was consistent across all outlets that reported it, which confirms its authenticity as a deliberate public communication rather than a second-hand account. He said there was no finer actor than Gene. He described Hackman as intense and instinctive, qualities that anyone who observed Hackman's work closely would recognize as genuinely precise rather than generic. The intensity was real and visible in everything from the coiled, controlled fury of Jimmy Doyle in The French Connection to the dangerous authority of Little Bill Daggett to the vulnerable determination of the coach in Hoosiers. The instinctiveness was equally real, a quality that the best trained actors develop across years of work until technical method and emotional truth become indistinguishable from each other. Saying there was never a false note in Hackman's work was not a eulogy formula. It was an observation that anyone who had worked beside him on 2 significant films and had therefore witnessed his process from close proximity was qualified to make. The broader Hollywood response to Hackman's death confirmed the depth of feeling his career had generated. Morgan Freeman, who had appeared alongside Hackman in both Unforgiven and in Under Suspicion, delivered a tribute at the 97th Academy Awards on March 2, 2025, according to People magazine's coverage of the ceremony, describing the loss as personal and calling Hackman a generous performer who lifted the work of everyone around him. Francis Ford Coppola posted a tribute on social media calling Hackman inspiring and magnificent. Mel Brooks, Saul Rubinek, and numerous others from across the entertainment industry offered their own acknowledgments. But it was Eastwood's statement that circulated most persistently in the days and weeks that followed, because the relationship it represented was one of the most artistically significant in either man's career, and because the precision of the language reflected a genuine understanding of what Hackman had been rather than the generic admiration that famous deaths routinely generate. The specific phrase, "no finer actor," is worth dwelling on because of who said it. Eastwood has worked across more than 6 decades with an extraordinary range of performing talent. He has been directed by Sergio Leone and Don Siegel. He has directed performances that won Academy Awards from Hilary Swank and Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins and Sean Penn. He has shared screens with performers of remarkable caliber across every decade of his career. When a person with that depth and breadth of reference uses the superlative "no finer," it is not casual. It is the considered judgment of someone who has seen enough to know what the best looks like and is applying that standard to a specific person. He knew what Gene Hackman was because he had watched him work and because he had done it from the position of collaborator and director, not merely as an observer. The friendship that Eastwood described alongside the professional tribute adds another dimension to the statement. He called Hackman a dear friend. The details of their private relationship across the years are not extensively documented in the public record, which is entirely consistent with how both men conducted their personal lives. Neither was given to public disclosure of the texture of his friendships or his inner life. But the word dear carries weight when it comes from someone who uses language as economically as Eastwood uses it. It was not a word chosen carelessly. Clint Eastwood at 94 is still working, still directing, still engaged with the film medium that has been his primary language for more than 60 years. He is the rare figure in American cultural life who has sustained genuine creative relevance across multiple generations of audience and multiple eras of the film industry, adapting to changed conditions without losing the essential quality of seriousness and commitment that has characterized his work from the beginning. Hackman's death, arriving at the end of 2 decades of voluntary and complete retirement from public life, removed from the world one of the very few performers of his own generation who could be placed beside him in any honest assessment of what American cinema produced at its finest in the second half of the 20th century. The statement Eastwood issued was not designed to generate attention for itself. It was designed to say something true about someone who mattered, in the fewest possible words, and then allow the work that both men had done to continue speaking on its own behalf. That is what it did. And at 94 years old, it was exactly the right thing to say.